Motorola moves to a different part of the alphabet that, at first glance, doesn't quite seem like the kind of device that a typical Western user would want. Essentially made to its retail value, this phone packs far less than the typical power performers that we've become rather accustomed to. But Moto has made it clear that it's not necessarily abashed power that is the point here. It's about an experience that is meant to last and is meant to be the most accessible package ever. Is it? Well, let's find out, because it's Joshua Vergara from Android Authority. And this is the Moto E. If there's one thing about this phone that is obvious from the get-go, this is a Moto device, and you can tell just by the shape of it. The generally curved design all around that results in a pebble-like design is now a common trope that was originally introduced in the Moto X, only now it's a bit smaller, but generally beefier in thickness and weight. Up front is the 4.3-inch screen, a screen size many of us might look at as a bit of a throwback. Above and below it are the only main stylistic choices made in this device: silver slits that house the phone and loudspeakers. Coming around the sides, you'll see that the button layout is only on the right side with the power and volume rockers underneath it. And as far as the feel goes on those buttons, they are really squishy, but at the very least, I didn't have any problems with the responsiveness of these buttons. The volume rockers are a little bit better when it comes to their press, but the power button is what is the squishiest out of the three. The soft touch back is removable and replaceable with a number of different colored Motorola shells that, of course, will cost a little bit more money. Now, they're not terribly tough to get off by any means, and once you get that cover off, you have access to the SIM tray and, of course, the micro SD card slot. You can largely rest assured that this phone will withstand your lifestyle, whatever it is, as not only has the screen been made with Gorilla Glass 3, but the entire device has been rated to handle tumbles and splashes and be able to bounce right back. Things are generally really simplistic for the Moto E, but what I really did think when I was using this phone was, at its price, it manages to not look like a feature phone, and that is thanks to Moto's general style. The 4.3-inch capacitive touchscreen comes with a resolution of 960 by 540 and 256 pixels per inch. The pixel density is actually the main draw here, as the resolution is pretty much expected for a phone that is supposed to go to a lower spec overall. The sharpness here, however, is higher than that of any other phone sporting the same size screen. Navigating through the interface and getting through websites posed no issues then. And while the ultra-colorful Candy Crush has definitely seen some better days, it still is workable on this smaller screen. As you will find is the case with this phone from here on out, the Moto E is ultimately capable of being the lasting communication device it is meant to be, only somewhat capable of tasks that require more than it is able to provide. This is especially true considering the power package found within. The Moto E just might be the first time many of you have heard of the Snapdragon 200, the dual-core 1.2 GHz processor backed by the Adreno 302 and 1GB of RAM. As was somewhat demonstrated in our comparison to the Moto G, the Moto E is simply just a slow device all around, far from the snappy experience that you would expect from higher-rated Snapdragon processors that we've become accustomed to by now. 1GB of RAM also, unfortunately, doesn't feel like enough for any power users out there, and eventually you will experience slowdown if you try to go too crazy. Expect either some forced closes or the need to restart the phone if it tends to get too sluggish. You will see more cut corners in the hardware aspect, where plenty of concessions were made in order to ensure the low cost of this device. One place that we have to tip the hat to, though, is definitely that front-facing speaker. It's not an incredible performer, but just its placement is enough to truly set this phone apart from a vast majority of similarly priced offerings. Motorola also doesn't skimp out on the call quality, as the same great sound comes through on either end of the call. And in terms of phone networks, this budget-priced phone made for the global stage sticks to HSDPA connectivity for workably fast mobile internet. Dual SIM versions of this phone are available in certain markets, making this one of the cheapest smartphones available that offer such a feature. And as far as storage goes, 4GB are found on board, but you are able to expand it with a micro SD card slot that can have cards of up to 32GB in capacity. And you are going to need it though. To install anything more than the bare essentials, 4GB of space is simply not enough to handle a full suite of applications for even the slightly above average user. Not to mention any of your media that could take up space even quicker. And finally, in the power department, this phone is touted to be capable of lasting all day with a 1980 mAh unit. Now, it should come as no surprise that this phone is actually not supposed to be able to take moderately heavy to heavy usage, especially when it comes to media consumption. So when you sort of change your perspective on the Moto E, you realize that this is a phone that is supposed to be used primarily as a communication device. And when you do it that way, you do get some lasting longevity from this. That kind of usage means sticking to primarily making phone calls, working with SMS messages, emails, and doing some web browsing. And if you do, I have no doubt that it will last the full 12 hours and with power saving likely beyond. The camera situation on the Moto E is, well, bleak at best, as it is where the most corners were cut. In a nutshell, there is a 5-megapixel shooter but no flash, and it works with a fixed focus. Getting into the app first, however, we do find the same simplistic interface that Moto generally sticks with. HDR and panorama are available, but those are the real only additions. Shooting is fairly fast, but without the quality and the control, it's a bit of a stale trade-off. As such, the quality of photos is dependent on your ability to really set up the scene. Fixed focus is the biggest detractor and thus requires you to be able to frame your scene to the best possible outcome. Anything close up will remain blurry, while the lack of flash makes low-light situations a fringe shooting opportunity at best. Ultimately, the 5-megapixel shooter of the Moto E is a requirement for the smartphone experience and by far is not a defining feature of this budget smartphone. And finally, in software, you do get Android 4.4.2 KitKat with the promise of timely updates from Motorola, making this one of the easiest entry points for any new Android user. You get what you would expect from the core experience though. Home screens, app drawer, notification dropdown, and the quick settings. And I have already mentioned the periodical force closes that can happen, and the phone's own limitations, especially in regards to low RAM and low storage. But underneath the core surface are a few Motorola additions. Motorola Assist does help in certain instances, changing phone settings to cater to where it knows you are. Motorola Alert is an actual nice addition introduced in the Moto E that might just save you from predicament. It allows for emergency correspondence with any specific context of your choosing and includes a built-in alarm if things get really hairy. And finally, Motorola Migrate makes it easier for you to transition from past devices to your new Moto E. The Moto E is able to boast that it has stock Android, or at least comes really close to it. And for that price, having stock Android and the promise of timely updates does make that a feather in its cap. Unlocked, the Moto E comes in at $129 and is one of the lowest prices you can currently get for a smartphone. The closest competitor is actually from Moto itself, which is the Moto G, and we already made a comparison video with it. You can pay the $50 premium for the G for a better screen, a better processing package that can yield a more reliable performance experience, and still have the same good build quality and strong connectivity characteristic of Motorola devices. And so, there you have it, the Moto E. This is definitely a case where the phone falls in line with its retail value. While for some people, this phone will be considered a steal, for others it is an indication of just what is missing in the experience. And what we have to remember is that those are two different camps, and this phone is trying to reach both groups of people, and quite literally everyone else in between. In plenty of places around the world, the Moto E will likely be considered the gateway into the current world of smartphones. On the other side of the spectrum, people who might already have the means to buy higher tier devices will look to the Moto E as no more than a backup phone. And you know what? Both sides make sense. No matter where you stand on that spectrum, what you get in the Moto E is a phone that excels at the bare essentials, the core communication experience, a sturdy build quality that can last, and the battery power to help you stay in touch with all those who are important to you. So if you know anybody in your life that still has not used Android or for that matter a smartphone, the Moto E right here is probably the shallowest part of the pool. So you can encourage them to just jump right in. As always, thank you guys very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this review of the Moto E. Yes, it comes with a lot of limitations, but you get what you pay for with that $129 price point. And for a lot of people around the world, this just might be the gateway into smartphones or Android for that matter. So keep it tuned to Android Authority for all of the best coverage, and don't forget to check out all of our coverage on reviews, our show coverage, also our weekly shows, and the coverage from the likes of Joe, Jace, Kevin the Tech Ninja, and of course, Lon. So keep it tuned here, drop us some likes on our videos, because we love to see those thumbs up, and don't forget to hit up that subscribe button if you haven't already. And once you're done with all that, head on over to AndroidAuthority.com because we are your source for all things Android.